Okay. Thanks, Daniel, for the introduction. I'm Maya. I'll be talking about snargs for monotone policy batch NP. And this is joint work with Zvika Brekersky, Yael Tauman-Kalai, Alex Lombardi, and Domer Panet. Okay. So I'll start by defining snargs, or succinct non-interactive arguments. So in a snarg, we have a prover and a verifier, and they share some CRS. And the prover sends a proof to the verifier to convince him that some statement X is in an NP language L. This proof is publicly verifiable, and it's succinct, so it should be much shorter than the length of the NP witness for X. Finally, we also have the standard properties of completeness and soundness, where soundness holds against computationally bounded provers. So ideally, we would like to get snargs for all of NP, but we have barriers to basing that based on falsifiable assumptions. So instead, previous work constructing snargs from standard assumptions has mostly been focused on constructing snargs for various subclasses of NP and kind of trying to reach more and more meaningful types of computations. And there's been some significant progress. So by now we have snargs for all deterministic computations, for low space NP computations, and for a class called batch NP that I'll tell you more about later. Slightly more generally, we have a snarg for any language that has a special type of information theoretic proof system called a non-signaling PCP. And this class of non-signaling PCPs is actually pretty wide, and it covers all of the snargs we have so far from standard assumptions, including all of the examples I mentioned. However, this class also has some known barriers. So we know that under some mild complexity assumptions, there are some NP languages that don't have non-signaling PCPs. And so kind of all of our techniques so far have been inherently stuck at this barrier. I also want to quickly mention that there's another quite different approach to constructing snargs based on I/O. However, these snargs are kind of restricted and lack some important features we're interested in, like knowledge extraction. And I'll give a more detailed comparison later. But first, I want to tell you about our result. So in a nutshell, assuming LWE, we construct a snarg for a new meaningful subclass of NP. This class is called monotone policy batch NP, and it generalizes the batch NP class that I mentioned earlier, allowing to prove more kinds of batch statements. But really, I think the most exciting feature of our result is that this is the first snarg under standard assumptions for a language that's not known to have a non-signaling PCP. And so introduce a new paradigm and new tools to overcoming this non-signaling barrier. Okay, so before I tell you about this new monotone policy batch NP class, I want to first tell you about the snargs we already have for batch NP. So in a snarg for batch NP or BARG, we again have a prover and a verifier. And this time the prover wants to prove a conjunction of K NP statements to the verifier together in one short proof. So while the trivial solution would be to just send all K witnesses in the clear, BARGs allow us to do much better than that. They let us kind of merge these K witnesses together into one short proof that is basically just the length of one witness. And by now we have BARGs based on various standard assumptions, and they found many applications. And today we generalize this class to capture more kinds of batch statements. So in particular, while BARGs allow us to prove that K statements are all true, what if I want to prove something more complicated? Let's say that the majority of these statements are true. More generally, in monotone policy batch NP, we have some monotone function, and we want to prove that enough of our NP statements are true to satisfy this function. Good examples to keep in mind are majority or a T out of K threshold, checking that at least T statements are correct. But really, you could think of any monotone circuit, and it defines a monotone batch NP language. So for example, here, a statement where X1, X3, and X4 are true would be in the language, since we get that the circuit outputs 1. So in our work, we construct a snarg for this class. So let me tell you about our main theorem. So assuming polynomial hardness of LWE, we construct a snarg for this monotone policy batch NP class for any policy computable by a polynomial size monotone circuit. As for efficiency, the proof length, like in a BARG, grows just with the length of one witness. The CRS grows with the length of a witness plus an additive overhead in the batch size K. And I'll also mention that for some restricted classes of circuits, we can get an even shorter CRS. So that's efficiency. Now for soundness of our snarg, there are two settings we consider. So first, in the non-adaptive setting, our snarg satisfies the standard argument of knowledge guarantee. The more challenging setting is the adaptive one, where the prover can adversarially choose the statements he's trying to prove after seeing the CRS. So in this setting, it turns out that we again have barriers for basing that on falsifiable assumptions. So instead, we introduce and prove a new relaxed notion of soundness called subset extractability that captures a meaningful notion of knowledge extraction that works even against adaptive adversaries. So let me tell you a bit more about this new soundness notion. So it was inspired by a similar notion, was defined for BARGs called somewhere extractability. So here we have an adaptive cheating prover for the BARG. And ideally, we would like to get full knowledge extraction here. So ideally, we would like to have some extractor that takes in the proof pi and extracts all K witnesses from it. However, this is kind of too much to hope for, since the proof is just too short to contain information about all K witnesses. So instead, somewhere extractability basically says we can only extract one witness, but we can choose which witness we want to extract in a way that's hidden from the prover. So in a bit more detail, in a somewhere extractable BARG, we also have a programmed setup procedure generating a CRS that's programmed on some index I. And first of all, we're guaranteed that this CRS is indistinguishable from the honest CRS, so it hides the index we're interested in. And secondly, using the trapdoor generated together with the CRS, and the proof, we can extract a witness for the if statement. And we know that if the proof is accepting, then accept with negligible probability, the witness is valid. So this notion has turned out to be a useful yet achievable notion for bargs. And so we would like to get something similar also for our monotone policy batch and P class. But note that for monotone policies, since we're no longer proving that the case statements are all true, it doesn't make sense to extract a witness for any index we want. It could be that some instances are just false. So instead, instead of extracting any index, we extract some index from so-called necessary subsets. So let me define what a necessary subset is and our new subset extractability notion. So a necessary subset for a policy F is some subset of inputs such that any input that satisfies the policy must have at least one true bit inside of this subset. So intuitively, this means that we could hope to extract a witness for some statement inside of this subset. Equivalently, a subset is necessary even if you satisfy everything outside of this subset, that's still not enough to satisfy the policy. And going back to our threshold example, in a T out of K threshold, any set of size greater than K minus T is necessary. And in bargs, any non-empty set is necessary, which explains why we could extract any index we want. So with this definition, we can define our new soundness notion. And here, everything is exactly the same as with bargs. The only difference is that now the CRS is programmed on a subset. And using the trapdoor, we can extract a witness for some index inside of that subset. So this is our new soundness notion, and we prove it for our bargs. And before I tell you about our techniques, I want to give a quick comparison to the work of Sahai and Waters that I mentioned earlier. So Sahai and Waters construct snargs for all of NP based on IO. IO by itself is not a falsifiable assumption. And while there have been constructions based on well-founded assumptions, these are all assumed to be sub-exponentially hard, while our snarg can be based on polynomial hardness of LWE. We also get a shorter CRS. And finally, while Sahai Waters offers no adaptive or knowledge soundness, we achieve this new subset extractability notion, capturing a meaningful notion of extraction that works even in the adaptive setting. Okay, so that's our result. Now I want to tell you a bit about our techniques and how we go beyond non-signaling PCPs. So our starting point is a protocol that we call the Canonical protocol, or hash and barg. So this protocol turns out to be flawed, so it won't exactly work for us, but it's a good starting point and a good protocol to have in mind. So this protocol actually works for any NP computation, but I'll describe it for the specific case of our monotone policy batch and P class. So again, we have our circuit, and the proof is actually pretty simple. It contains two components. First, we have a hash of all the wire values in the circuit as claimed by the prover. And this is some hash with local opening. So think of a Merkle tree of all the circuit wire values. The second component in the proof is a barg proof, showing that kind of all of the hashed wire values form a valid and accepting circuit computation. So this barg proof contains n+1 statements. So first, we have a statement for each input wire, claiming that if the hashed value is 1, then there really is an accepting witness for that instance. Second, for each gate in the circuit, we have a statement claiming that the values in this gate are consistent with each other. And finally, for the output wire, we have a statement claiming that it's 1. So that's the protocol, and it obviously satisfies completeness, and it also satisfies succinctness, which follows from the succinctness of the barg. But really the flaw here, and the reason it doesn't work for us, is soundness. And the reason that this protocol is not sound in general is that bargs don't give us full adaptive soundness. They only give us this somewhere extractability notion. And so what we get is a kind of local consistency of the circuit where we can extract small sets of wires and we know that they're consistent with each other. But it's not clear that we have a fully consistent global assignment to the circuit. And moreover, even if we try to kind of extract different parts of the computation and piece them together into one consistent assignment, the prover can use a new hash root every time. So it's not clear that we could really construct a global assignment. So really, this protocol is flawed, but it turns out that we do have some hope to fix it. So one way to fix this protocol would be to construct a compiler that takes in our computation and outputs a new computation that is kind of hash and barg friendly, in the sense that for this compiled computation, the local consistency given by the hash and barg protocol is enough to argue global consistency. And so running this compiler and then our original protocol, we would get a fully sound snarg. So that's a good approach. And indeed, it was implemented by some prior work. So for example, the work of Kalai, Raz, and Rothblum constructing snargs for P built this kind of compiler based on error correcting codes. So we could try to construct a similar compiler for a monotone policy batch and P class. But it turns out that any attempt to build such a compiler is also blocked by the same non-signaling barrier. And the reason is that an information theoretic compiler, like I described, is exactly equivalent to a non-signaling PCP for the language. So again, we're stuck at the same non-signaling barrier. So our main observation in our work and the way we go beyond this barrier is by introducing crypto into this compiler to go beyond non-signaling PCPs. So in particular, while prior works constructed information theoretic compilers based on tools like error correcting codes, we introduced a new cryptographic tool called the predicate extractable hash that allows us to construct our compiler. So let me tell you a bit more about this new tool. So if you're familiar with the somewhere extractable hash that allows you to program the hash on some index and then extract from the hash value a specific input bit, predicate extractable hash allows you to program the hash on some global predicate and then extract it. So in a bit more detail, it's a hash family with two functionalities. So first, we have predicate extraction. And this says that we can generate a hash key programmed on some predicate F. And we have two guarantees. First, this hash key is indistinguishable from the honest hash key, so it hides the predicate we're interested in. And second, we can take a hash root computed using this hash key and the corresponding trapdoor and extract the value of the global predicate F on our hashed input. So that's predicate extraction. The second functionality that predicate extractable hash gives us is the standard local opening functionality, where we can prove that some bit is consistent with the hash with a succinct local opening. So in order for this new primitive to be useful, we also need some binding notion or some consistency notion connecting these two functionalities together. So intuitively, we would like to have some guarantee that says something like, if we can open an input bit with a local opening, then that bit must be consistent with the extracted value of the predicate. However, for general families of predicates, it's not clear how to define such a binding notion, since it doesn't always make sense for a single bit to be consistent with a global function in a meaningful way. So instead, we focus on a specific family of predicates that we call the bit fixing family of predicates. So here, a predicate is defined by some pattern containing 0, 1s, and stars. And an input satisfies this predicate if it matches this pattern. So the 0s and 1s have to match, and the stars can be anything. And for this family of predicates, we define a notion of binding that is sufficient. And we also give a construction based on leveled homomorphic encryption, which can be based on LWE. And this family of predicates turns out to be enough for constructing our snark. Okay, so that's predicate extractable hash. And to summarize, we construct a snarg for a new meaningful subclass of NP called monotone policy batch NP. And this is the first snarg under standard assumptions for a language that's not known to have a non-signaling BCP. We also introduce a new soundness notion for these snargs called subset extractability that captures a meaningful notion of knowledge extraction that works even against adaptive adversaries. And the main idea and the way we go beyond non-signaling PCPs is by introducing crypto into the compiler, going from local to global soundness. And we believe that this new paradigm could be used to construct snargs for even more languages in the future. To implement this compiler, we introduce a new primitive called the predicate extractable hash. And we also believe that it will find other applications. So that's it. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, we have time for questions. If you're in the audience, please come up to the microphones. And if you're online, please just type your questions in the chat. I'll read them out. I have a quick question. So you said that there's this no signaling barrier towards this class. Is it known that no signaling PCPs cannot exist for the class, or is it just an open question? That
yeah, it's an open question. We don't have lower bounds, but we also don't know non-signaling PCPs for this class.
Maybe we have some time. Can you also say a little bit more about how the specific function, this bit matching function for which you construct the extractable hash, how it matches the monotone fallacy circuits? Like, why is that the right class?
Yeah, so essentially the idea is that we want to define some consistency property for like a layer in the computation, saying that it's consistent. And the idea is like the consistency property that we ask for is that all the wires in the layer that are actually false, their values should be fixed to 0. And so we program the bit fixing predicate that checks this.
Right. Don't see any other questions, so let's thank the speaker again.